You'll take every inch until you can't walk. The giant bride told the lonely cowboy the sun hung low over the Rocky Mountains, casting long shadows across the dusty trail that led into Silver Creek. Jacob Morrison urged his weary horse forward, the animal's hooves kicking up small clouds of dirt with each step. He'd been riding for 3 days straight, moving from one nameless town to another, searching for something he couldn't quite name. Perhaps peace, perhaps purpose, perhaps just a reason to stop running from the ghost of his past. Silver Creek wasn't much to look at, a collection of weathered wooden buildings clustered along a single main street, with the mountains looming like silent sentinels behind it. The saloon's doors swung lazily in the afternoon breeze, and a few townspeople paused their conversations to eye the stranger with the kind of suspicion common in isolated frontier towns. Jacob dismounted at the general store, tying his horse to the hitching post. Inside, the proprietor, a balding man with wire-rimmed spectacles, looked up from his ledger. "Passing through?" the man asked, his tone neither friendly nor hostile. "Looking for work," Jacob replied, his voice rough from disuse. "Ranch hand, trail guide, anything honest." The proprietor's expression shifted, something between pity and amusement crossing his weathered face. "Might try the Patterson Ranch, 5 miles north. They're always needin' help." He paused, then leaned forward conspiratorially. "Though, if you're looking for something unusual, there's work to be had helping that woman up at the mountain pass." "Woman? Giant girl, more like?" The proprietor shook his head. "Lives alone in a cabin near Eagle's Rest. Hauls timber, breaks horses, does work that'd take 3 men to accomplish. She comes to town for supplies once a month, and folks generally keep their distance. Unnatural, some say." Jacob felt a stirring of curiosity. "Unnatural how?" "You'll see if you venture that way, though I'd advise against it. She's got a temper to match her size, they say. Ran off the last 3 men who tried to court her. One supposedly didn't walk right for a week after she threw him clear across her property." As Jacob left the store with his modest supplies, he couldn't shake the image forming in his mind. A woman living alone in these mountains, ostracized by fear and ignorance. He knew something about loneliness, about being cast aside. His wife Sarah had died 3 winters ago, taken by fever, and since then he'd been drifting like tumbleweeds across the frontier, unable to root himself anywhere that held memories of what he'd lost. 2 days later, while tracking a deer trail up into the higher elevations, Jacob heard an unusual sound, a voice, unmistakably female, speaking soothingly to an animal in distress. He guided his horse through a narrow canyon and emerged into a small clearing where a sight stopped him cold. A woman stood in a rocky gully, her back to him, and she was indeed enormous. She had to be at least 6.5 feet tall, with broad shoulders and arms corded with muscle, visible even through her workshirt. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and she was currently attempting to coax a panicked horse away from a precarious ledge where it had apparently become trapped. "Easy now, easy," she murmured, her voice surprisingly gentle. "Nobody's going to hurt you. Just a few steps this way, that's all." The horse whinnied, eyes rolling white with fear. The woman reached out slowly, and when the animal reared, she moved with startling speed, catching its halter and using her considerable strength to pull it away from the edge. The horse fought her, hooves flailing, but she held firm, absorbing blows that would have felled a normal person, murmuring reassurances until the animal finally calmed. Jacob watched in amazement as she led the trembling horse out of danger, checking it for injuries with practiced hands. "That was impressive," he called out, announcing his presence. She whirled around, and Jacob got his first clear look at her face. She was younger than he'd expected, perhaps mid-20s, with strong, handsome features and striking green eyes that currently held a mixture of wariness and defiance. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice carrying easily across the clearing. "What are you doing on my land?" "Jacob Morrison, ma'am. I was tracking game and heard the commotion. That your horse?" "No." She stroked the animal's neck. "Found him wandering up here yesterday. Branded. Belongs to someone down in the valley. Was bringing him down when he spooked at a rattler and ran into this canyon." Her eyes narrowed. "You from the town?" "Just passing through." "Then keep passing." She turned her attention back to the horse, dismissing him. Jacob should have left, should have continued on his way and forgotten about the giant woman in the mountains. But something in her voice, a note of profound loneliness beneath the brusque exterior, resonated with something deep in his own battered soul. "Seems like you could use help getting that horse down the mountain," he said instead. "Trail's pretty rough?" She looked at him again, this time with something like surprise. "You offering?" "Yes, ma'am." For a long moment she studied him, those green eyes seeming to see straight through to his bones. Then she nodded once, sharply. "Fine. But if you're thinking what most men think when they see me, best disabuse yourself now. I don't need pity, Charity, or some misguided attempt at courting. I need help with a horse. That's all." "Understood," Jacob said simply, and meant it. Her name was Clara Thornton, and as they worked together to guide the nervous horse down the treacherous mountain path, Jacob learned her story in fragments. She'd been born this way, unusually large even as a child, growing to her considerable height by age 15. Her parents had died of cholera when she was 17, leaving her the cabin and a small plot of land. She'd survived alone ever since, using her strength to do work others couldn't, slowly carving out an existence in the wilderness. "People fear what they don't understand," she said as they paused to let the horses rest. "In the town, children point and mothers pull them away. Men either gawk or make crude jokes. I learned young that I'm better off alone." "Alone isn't always better," Jacob said quietly. "Sometimes it's just safer." She gave him a sharp look. "You speak from experience." "My wife died 3 years ago. Since then I've been moving from place to place, never staying long enough to put down roots. Figured it was easier than trying to build something new on the ruins of what I lost." Clara was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." They continued in companionable silence until they reached the valley where Clara intended to leave the horse. As they parted ways, she surprised him by saying, "There's a storm coming in tomorrow. If you're still in the area, my cabin's got a spare room and a roof that doesn't leak. Better than camping in the weather." Jacob accepted, and that night, sitting by her fireplace while wind howled outside, they talked properly for the first time. Clara spoke of her dreams, to expand her land, perhaps start breeding horses, to prove to the town that she was more than just a freak of nature to be whispered about. Jacob shared memories of Sarah, finding to his surprise that it didn't hurt quite as much as it once had. "Why are you really here?" Clara asked eventually. "You could work anywhere. Why stay in these mountains?" Jacob considered the question. Maybe because I recognized something in you that first day, that look in your eyes when you turned around, like you're constantly ready for rejection, for people to turn away. I've had that same look for 3 years. Clara's expression softened. You're a strange man, Jacob Morrison. I'll take that as a compliment. Over the following weeks, Jacob found himself returning to Clara's cabin again and again. At first, he told himself it was just to help with heavy work, repairing her barn, cutting firewood for winter, breaking a particularly stubborn Mustang she'd captured. But truthfully, he was drawn by her company, by the easy way they worked together, by the rare smile that transformed her severe features into something beautiful. Clara, for her part, seemed to thaw gradually. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson, she said, "You know, people will talk if you keep coming up here." "Let them talk. They'll say terrible things about both of us." Jacob turned to face her. "Clara, I've learned something in my years. Life's too short to live it worrying about what small-minded people think. I come up here because I want to, because you're good company, because I haven't felt this much like myself since Sarah died." She looked away, but not before he saw the emotion in her eyes. "You don't know what you're saying. You don't know what being with someone like me would mean. The stares, the whispers, the constant judgment." "Maybe I do," he said quietly. "Or maybe I just don't care anymore." The next day, Clara took him deeper into the mountains, to a high meadow where wild flowers grew in profusion despite the harsh altitude. They worked together to harvest medicinal herbs she sold to the town doctor, one of the few people who treated her with consistent respect. "This is my test for you," she said suddenly, straightening from her crouch among the flowers. "If you want to stay, if you want to be part of my life, you need to understand what it means. You'll take every inch of who I am, my size, my strength, my past, my reputation, until you can't walk away from it, until you're so deep in this life that leaving would hurt more than staying." Jacob stood, meeting her eyes. "I'm already there, Clara." "You say that now. But when winter comes and we're snowed in together for months, when the townspeople refuse to serve you because you're seen with me, when—" He crossed the distance between them and took her hand. It was nearly twice the size of his, calloused and strong, but it trembled slightly at his touch. "I'm already there," he repeated. "Test me however you need to. I'm not going anywhere." The tests came in many forms. Clara pushed him physically, taking him on grueling hikes through mountain passes, asking him to help her move boulders and fallen trees that would have required a team of oxen. She tested his patience, sometimes retreating into cold silence when her insecurities flared. She tested his courage, asking him to accompany her into town where they faced the stares and whispers together. Through it all, Jacob remained steady. When his muscles screamed from exertion, he pushed through. When she withdrew emotionally, he gave her space but never left entirely. When men in the saloon made crude comments about her, he faced them down with a quiet intensity that made even the loudest bully think twice. Autumn deepened into early winter, and their relationship deepened with it. They worked side by side, their different strengths complementing each other. Jacob's keen eye and patience balanced Clara's raw power and determination. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes reading, sometimes just existing in comfortable silence. One night, Clara spoke of her greatest fear. "I worry that one day you'll wake up and realize you've made a terrible mistake, that you'll look at me and see what everyone else sees, a woman who's too much, too big, too strong, too different." Jacob reached for her hand. "You know what I see when I look at you? I see someone who's survived impossible odds, who's made a life for herself when the world tried to make her small, who's strong enough to move mountains but gentle enough to calm a frightened horse. I see the woman I love, Clara, all of you, every inch." Tears sparkled in her eyes. "You love me?" "I do. Have for weeks now, if I'm honest." She pulled him close, and for the first time she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved this happiness. But the world wasn't finished testing them. The trouble began in town, as these things often did. A wealthy rancher named Dalton Grimes had long coveted Clara's land. It had access to the best water sources in the region. He'd made offers before, all rejected. Now, with Clara apparently softening her isolation by taking up with the stranger Morrison, he saw an opportunity. Grimes began spreading rumors that Clara had bewitched Jacob with dark mountain magic, that she'd killed men before who'd crossed her, that she was planning to expand her holdings by force. The whispers grew into shouts, and by late November, a delegation arrived at Clara's cabin. "We're here on behalf of the town council," announced Sheriff Porter, a decent man who looked uncomfortable with his task. There'd been complaints about property boundaries, about intimidation. Intimidation? Clara's voice was dangerously quiet. "Who have I intimidated, Sheriff?" "Mr. Grimes says you threatened him when he tried to discuss purchasing your land. I told him no, same as always. If he calls that a threat, that's his weakness, not my crime." Behind the sheriff, Jacob could see Grimes and several of his men. The rancher stepped forward, a smug expression on his weathered face. "Thing is, Miss Thornton, we've done some research. Turns out your daddy never properly filed the deed to this land. Legally speaking, it's open to claim, and I'm claiming it." Clara went very still. Jacob knew that stillness, had seen it before a storm. "My father built this cabin with his own hands. This land is mine by right of living here, working it, making it productive." "Law says different," Grimes replied. "I've got the papers filed in the county seat. You've got 1 week to vacate." What happened next occurred so fast that Jacob barely registered it. Clara lunged forward, and only his quick intervention and the sheriff's restraining hand prevented violence. But the damage was done. Grimes stumbled backward, shouting about assault, demanding Clara be arrested. "That's enough!" Sheriff Porter's voice cracked like a whip. "Grimes, you provoked this deliberately. Clara, you need to control yourself. Both of you, stand down now." The delegation left with threats and warnings, and Clara stood in the clearing, shaking with rage and anguish. "He can't do this," she whispered. "This is my home, my only home." Jacob pulled her close, feeling the tremors running through her powerful frame. "We'll fight this. There has to be a way." But fighting required money for lawyers, time for appeals, and resources they didn't have. Over the next several days, they rode to the county seat, only to discover that Grimes had indeed filed claim papers and had several officials in his pocket. The law, it seemed, wasn't interested in justice for a woman who lived alone in the mountains. On the 4th day, defeated and exhausted, they began the long ride back to Silver Creek. The weather had turned brutal, with heavy clouds promising snow. They were still 10 miles from the cabin when the storm hit with savage intensity. Within minutes, visibility dropped to nearly nothing. Jacob stayed close to Clara, who knew the mountain paths better than anyone, but even she struggled in the whiteout conditions. The temperature plummeted, and Jacob felt ice forming in his beard. "There's a cave system near here," Clara shouted over the howling wind. "We need shelter." They dismounted, leading the horses by feel more than sight. Clara's strength became their salvation as she literally carved a path through waist-deep drifts, creating a trail that Jacob and the horses could follow. His hands were numb, his feet like blocks of ice, and still she pushed forward, refusing to stop until they found the cave entrance. Inside, out of the immediate fury of the storm, they worked together to secure the horses and build a fire from dead wood stored in the cave's depths. Clara's hands, despite their earlier exertion, worked swiftly and surely. Within an hour, they had warmth and light. As the adrenaline faded, the reality of their situation sank in. They could be trapped here for days. And worse, Clara's hands were showing signs of severe frostbite from breaking trail without proper gloves. "Let me see," Jacob said, reaching for her hands. She tried to pull away. "I'm fine. You're the one who needs warming." "Clara, please." Reluctantly, she extended her hands. 2 fingers on her right hand were white and hard. Jacob's heart sank. He'd seen frostbite before, seen men lose fingers, even hands. "We need to warm these slowly," he said, forcing calm into his voice. "Too fast, and the damage gets worse." He spent the next several hours tending to her, using his own body heat, warm water from melted snow, gentle massage. Clara bore it stoically, but he could see the fear in her eyes. For a woman who relied on her physical strength to survive, the loss of even 1 finger could be catastrophic. "I'm scared," she finally admitted, her voice small in a way he'd never heard before. "Not just about my hands, about everything. If Grimes takes the cabin, where will I go? What will I do? This mountain is all I know." Jacob pulled her close, careful of her injured hands. "You'll do what you've always done, survive, but this time you won't be alone. Whatever happens, wherever we end up, we'll face it together. You'd give up everything for me? A woman you've known barely 2 months? A woman the whole world sees as a freak?" "I'd give up anything except you," he said simply. "Clara, my life before I met you was just existence. You've given me purpose again, hope, love. You're not taking me away from something, you're giving me everything." She broke then, tears streaming down her face as all the fear, anger, and loneliness of years poured out. Jacob held her, this giant woman who'd never been able to show weakness, and let her grieve for everything she stood to lose. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days during which Jacob cared for Clara's hands, kept the fire burning, rationed their meager supplies, and talked with her about a future that seemed increasingly uncertain. 3 days during which they stripped away every pretense and defense, leaving only raw honesty between them. On the 3rd night, Clara said, "When we get back, I'm going to fight. Not the legal way, that's rigged against me. But Grimes wants my land for the water rights. I'm going to offer him a deal. He can have access to the water, can run cattle through certain sections, but the cabin and the immediate area stay mine. Joint use of the land. You think he'll go for it? He's a businessman underneath the bluster. If I can make it more profitable for him to share than to fight, yes. And if he won't—" her jaw set with determination. "Then I'll make things very difficult for him. I know every inch of this mountain, every trail, every water source, every shortcut. I can make his cattle drives take twice as long, can redirect streams, can do 100 things that'll cost him more than buying me out would have." Jacob smiled. "That's my Clara, thinking like a strategist. I learned from you. You showed me that sometimes the best fight isn't the direct one. Sometimes you win by being smarter, not just stronger." By the time the storm cleared, Clara's hands were healing. She'd keep all her fingers, though 2 would bear scars. They emerged from the cave into a landscape transformed by snow, glittering and pristine under brilliant sunshine. The return to the cabin took most of the day, but they found it intact, if nearly buried in drifts. As they dug out the entrance, they saw smoke rising from the town below. Someone had been watching for them. Within an hour, Sheriff Porter arrived on snowshoes, his expression grave. "Thank God you're alive. When you didn't return, we feared the worst. The whole town's been searching the lower slopes." "The whole town?" Clara's voice was skeptical. "Well, enough of it. You might be surprised, Miss Thornton. When we thought you might be lost in the storm, a lot of folks realized they'd been cruel to you without cause. Doc Henderson organized search parties. Even some of Grimes's men joined in. As if summoned by his name, Dalton Grimes appeared an hour later, trudging through the snow on horseback. But the swagger was gone, replaced by something almost approaching humility. "Hear me out," he said when Clara emerged from the cabin. "I may have been hasty about the land claim. Got my lawyer looking into it, and turns out there's some question about whether those old deeds really were invalid. Could tie us up in court for years." Clara crossed her arms. Or we could work out an arrangement. I need the water rights for my cattle. You need your home. Maybe we can find a middle ground." Over the next week, with Sheriff Porter mediating and Jacob providing quiet counsel, they hammered out an agreement. Clara would retain ownership of her cabin and 20 acres surrounding it. Grimes would have access to the water sources with strict provisions about environmental protection and respect for Clara's property. In exchange, Grimes would formally recognize Clara's claim and help file the proper paperwork to secure it legally. It wasn't perfect, but it was workable. More importantly, it was achieved through negotiation rather than force, proving to both Clara and the town that she could be more than just the giant who lived in the mountains. The hardest part came in the following weeks, as Clara and Jacob worked to define what their relationship would become. The town's attitude had shifted, but not entirely. There were still those who muttered about the propriety of a woman living openly with a man she wasn't married to. One evening in late December, as fresh snow fell softly outside, Jacob built up his courage. "Clara, I have something to ask you." She looked up from the shirt she was mending, one of his, torn during their mountain ordeal. "Yes?" He knelt before her, taking her scarred hands in his. "I know we haven't known each other long by conventional standards. I know that marrying me won't make your life easier, might make it harder in some ways, but I love you with everything I am. You've brought me back to life when I thought that part of me died with Sarah. You've shown me that strength comes in many forms, and that the bravest thing we can do is choose to love despite fear. Clara Thornton, will you marry me?" She was silent for so long that Jacob's heart began to sink. Then she pulled him up, standing with him, and he saw that her eyes were wet with tears. "You really mean it, even knowing what you know, even after seeing how hard this life will be." "Especially because of that. I don't want easy, Clara. I want real. I want you." "Then yes." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, I'll marry you, Jacob Morrison, and I promise you I'll spend every day proving that you made the right choice." They married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at the town church. Doc Henderson gave Clara away, and Sheriff Porter stood as Jacob's witness. Not everyone attended. There were still those who couldn't accept the union, but enough came that the church felt full. Mrs. Patterson from the general store wept openly, declaring it the most romantic thing she'd ever witnessed. Reverend Cole, an old circuit preacher who'd known Clara since childhood, gave a sermon about love conquering fear and prejudice. We are called to see one another not as the world sees us, but as God sees us, with all our flaws and all our glory. This man and this woman have chosen to do that for each other. May we all be so brave. As Jacob and Clara exchanged vows, her hands held his so gently despite their strength, and his voice remained steady despite his emotion. When the Reverend declared them married, Clara pulled Jacob close for a kiss that lifted him clear off his feet, causing laughter to ripple through the congregation. The reception was held at their cabin, with those who'd come bringing food and gifts. Grimes himself appeared, awkward but sincere, offering a breeding mare as a wedding present. "Figure if you're going to stay up here permanently, might as well help you build that horse operation you mentioned," he said gruffly. "Consider it good business. Can't have my water source managed by people who fail and abandon the land." As the sun set and their guests departed, Clara and Jacob stood together on their porch, watching stars emerge in the vast Montana sky. The mountains rose around them, silent and eternal, sheltering their small patch of happiness. "You know," Clara said softly, "I used to curse these mountains for making me so isolated. But now I think maybe they were just waiting for someone to come along who could see past all the defenses I'd built." Jacob wrapped his arm around her waist, or tried to, settling for the small of her back. "And I was wandering, searching for something I'd lost. Turns out I needed to lose myself completely to find what I was really looking for." "What's that?" "Home. Not a place, but a person. You're my home now, Clara. Every impossible inch of you." She laughed, the sound echoing across the valley. "I did warn you, told you that you'd take every inch until you couldn't walk away. And I did. And I can't. And I don't want to." He turned to face her fully. "Thank you for letting me prove it. Thank you for trusting me with your heart. Thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked away." They went inside as the first winter stars blazed overhead, closing the door on the cold and the darkness, choosing instead the warmth they'd created together. Outside, the mountains stood watch, ancient and knowing, as they had for countless generations, as they would for countless more. In the months and years that followed, Clara and Jacob built the life they'd both dreamed of. The horse-breeding operation flourished, with Clara's strength and Jacob's patience creating animals known throughout the territory for their quality. The cabin was expanded, adding a proper stable and workshop. Their nearest neighbors, initially wary, became friends as they proved themselves good people to rely on in hard times. Clara never stopped being larger than life, and Jacob never stopped being the quiet, steady presence at her side. But together, they were something neither could have been alone. Proof that love didn't require perfection, only acceptance. That the right person didn't make you smaller to fit their world, but expanded their world to encompass all of you. And on clear nights, when they stood together watching the stars wheel overhead, they remembered those early days when neither had dared hope for what they'd found, the loneliness that had driven them together, the tests that had proven their commitment, the storm that had nearly destroyed them, but instead had forged them into something unbreakable. "I love you," Clara would say, her voice carrying softly on the mountain wind. "Every impossible inch," Jacob would reply, and they would laugh, knowing they had claimed something precious and rare, a love that saw past surfaces to souls, that chose courage over comfort, that proved the greatest strength was the strength to be vulnerable with another person. The mountains kept their secrets as mountains do, but this one they shared with the wind and the stars, that sometimes the most unlikely loves are the ones that endure, that giants and wanderers can find in each other what the whole world could not provide, and that home is not a place you find, but a person you choose again and again, for as long as breath and heartbeat last.